Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined the Doctor as he defends this podcast under siege in episode 489. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How are you guys?
Pretty good. You guys do anything this week? Anything fun? Keith, you
Nope.
start. Nope.
Not that I can think of.
Sean, what about you?
No, we really we had a very busy full weekend working on a yard project that's been kind of in our minds for a while. We are putting in a new patio with some paver stones, and just because we want a place to be able to sit and enjoy, and so I purchased a fire pit which arrived, and we went and got our paver stones, and after much debate over where they were going, finally picked them up, and they're going along the side of the house. We're basically extending out the patio that's already there.
That sounds like fun.
No.
That sounds like a project that'll be fun once you're done with it.
When we're done with
There you go.
Yeah. No, it was very much a matter of I hemmed and hawed for probably longer than I needed to, because it's one of those, I know me. I know that I am a hopeless home improvement person. I love the idea of these things. I loathe actually doing them. And it doesn't matter how excited I am. I'm not very good at it. And so we talked about it, and whether we were going to hire somebody or this, that, or the other, and just decided, it's just paver stones. How hard can this be?
Looks like you got them pretty even and straight from the pictures on Facebook.
Yeah, Billy came over, and he and Mel wound up tackling the majority of the work. We started at about 11 o'clock Sunday morning, and they finished the last row at about 8:30, 9 o'clock Sunday night. So it was a full day of moving stuff and digging up dirt and all that jazz. And I was good for about the first 2 hours, and then kind of tapped out because my hands hurt and my back hurt. And so I kept tabs on Shy, and they did all the work, and I feel miserable and emasculated. So, but we got about half of that's all the stones that we had, but it's about half of the distance that we're looking to take it out to.
Sean, look at it this way. In 2 more years, you could just say your age. So I'm just too old for that anymore.
Well,
I have
there's
the young people to do it.
I am rapidly reaching the point where there's many things on my list. It's like, no. I'm looking forward to sitting on this. But between you, me, and the listeners, don't nobody tell Mel, this is forwarding my private agenda to get a hot tub. Because now we will have a place to put it.
Yeah.
And a need for it, because she is stiff and sore today. So I've used every opportunity.
The patio, you could fit a hot tub there?
Yeah.
That's gonna be a big patio.
It'll be nice. And we don't own this place, so that's Let me tell you about that conversation. But no, so that ate up the majority of our weekend, was dealing with all of that.
I didn't really do anything either. I think this was a couple weeks back, and I think I forgot to mention, I listened to Big Finish's adaptations of Love and War and The Highest Science, which are 2 Seventh Doctor. Well, Love and War is a Seventh Doctor, Ace, and Bernice Summerfield's story, and that's it's an adaptation of the novel, New Adventures novel. And that's the one that introduces Bernice Summerfield. That one's by Paul Cornell. And so I had read it, I think last year or the year before. Both of those stories I'd read just within the last year or two. So I went ahead and decided to listen to them. And I really had no expectations that they would be able to adapt these 2 particular stories very well, because they're very high-minded, very complex stories. and I don't remember, was it Jacqueline Rayner? I can't remember who adapted these, but she does a fantastic job. And in fact, there's very little left out of Love and War, which amazed me. And there is just one or two elements left out of The Highest Science, which I think actually made it better that they weren't there. So
Really?
yeah. So I was really impressed, and I'm looking forward to us, in 15 years getting to those and getting to find out what you guys think of them, because they're both
truly a not so subtle jab there.
They're both terrific books, and now they were both terrific audios as well. So I've got a few more on the list, but I'm going to have to read the books before I move on to those. The other thing I did is I watched Godzilla vs. Kong.
Oh,
Man, that was a fun movie. That was so much fun. You had said there's still too much human factor to it. I think there's less human factor in this one than there is in any of the previous movies before. Now, it's still there. There's still, character arcs for the people, the humans, but it's very minimal compared to the amount of, monster on monster fighting action you get in the film. So
yeah, no, I agree with that. It's the human stuff is there, and it's I mean, realistically, any amount of human interaction is too much for a monster movie for me. But
see, I disagree, because I think people, and myself even included, as much as I like monster films, I think you could easily get bored with monster action without those little pads of break, and it's really hard to sympathize with a monster that hasn't been developed through the eyes of the humans in the story. And I think that helps sympathize with the beasts. And so, well, I think there are times that they go overboard with the human element. I think that you have to have it, and you can strike a good balance. And I think this movie strikes a good balance, if not a better balance, by tipping it the other way a bit.
it also helps that, I mean, in true Godzilla fashion, the humans, when they show up, pretty much do the I'm a human in a Godzilla movie, meaning I'm showing up strictly to spout out huge chunks of exposition.
And watch.
From
afar.
In wide-eyed amazement as another
or
town
die.
Right. That was the other thing, too. Spoilers, little minor spoilers. They end up in Hong Kong at one point, and I went, finally! I mean, gosh, how long did it take them to get Godzilla back to his home? Oh, wait a minute. That's Tokyo. Never mind. And I really, for like most of the time that they were in Hong Kong, I thought, I was thinking, oh, finally, it's about time that they... And then it occurred to me, nope, these are Japanese films, not Chinese films.
Oh.
So
I imagine by now the novelty has worn off in Tokyo.
Probably. Yeah, but you would just think one time. One time. Let's see. We watched we watched Avengers this weekend, so we're up to that now, and I think that's it. I watched Pitch Perfect, which I honestly had never seen all the way through. I'd seen pieces of it, but it's a funny little movie. I liked it too.
That's what I've heard good things about. I've not seen it either.
Glenn was also a very good sport and joined me over on TARDIS Sauce this week for a Torchwood discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And so, yeah.
I was the anti-apologist.
If you're in a mind for some really good Gretchen.
I don't know. I kind of railed it back. I thought it was pretty. I thought it was pretty subtle.
You were well behaved.
Yes, there you go. Well behaved. That's probably the better hat. All right. Well, should we move on to our discussion topic this week? Sean, you want to set us up a little bit? You kind of came up with this idea.
Oh, joy. Well, as I think any Doctor Who fan worth their salt, calling themselves a fan, knows, one of the tropes, as it were, with the show is the base under siege story, where you have alien or unknown force X attempting to gain access to location Y, where our heroes are, and we have until time frame Z to get out of it. And Doctor Who, I think, has used it certainly more frequently than just about any other genre series.
Particularly in the Second Doctor
era. But I think also to great effect. I think it's a story that, it's a story archetype that works, I think. And you don't find it just in genre stuff. I mean, obviously, Die Hard. That's a base under siege story. Home Alone. Base under siege story. Sure, they have Christmas trappings because they're both excellent Christmas movies. But they're, at their core, it's bad guys trying to get into a place. So it's a trope that's been around. Hell, the 300 Spartans. I mean, this is an old story.
Well, now I think you're oversimplifying it, but I mean, I think those have elements of Base Under Siege, but I think Base Under Siege has to hit pretty much at least 3 different criteria, and I think Base Under Siege has to be from almost like at least 70% of the piece has to be in a base under siege or in a situation where you've got an invading or infiltrating antagonist. So I think the majority of it has to be in order to classify it as base under siege. Now, I think you could make the argument for Die Hard to a certain point because it all does take place at one location. So I'll give you Die Hard. Aliens is a great example. I think the Thing is a great example. So there are really good examples out there, but I think you have to be careful when you're applying it to a little too liberally.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd classify Die Hard since it's more a guy trying to infiltrate a hostage situation, but Home Alone definitely would apply the base under siege model.
See, I'm the complete opposite on that one. I think that the reason why Die Hard is based under siege is because there's very little influence from the outside. It's all internal. Whereas Home Alone, there's a lot of
really not until the last half hour.
There's a lot of setup. There's a lot of exposition. There's a lot of getting to that point, and there's so little of base under siege in it that I just don't think it qualifies. It's more of a defending the perimeter, which base under siege can be. But so, what do you think? What makes a good base under siege story, Keith?
I think part of what makes a good base under siege story includes having a mystery at the beginning of not knowing who is going to be attacking. Making sure the tension is nice and high. That's a key point, is the high tension, and your stress level should be fairly high when it's a base under siege of how are they going to get out of this? How are they going to defend this base from getting attacked? And I think to some extent the resolution is a key point too. If it's too easily taken care of, then it's not a very good base under siege story, in my opinion.
Right, or the enemy could have been dispatched early on.
Right.
Sean, what do you think?
For me, it's the... I think all those things apply. I think Keith's right. I think the tension level has to be there. And it has to be... While the basic elements of a group of characters stuck in a confined space with enemy or enemies, trying to get them... But I think the telling of the tale is probably the best way to utilize that. And when you have some, one of my favorite stories in the Doctor Who range is, Horror Fang Rock. It's isolated. We're remote. We're on an island. We're in a lighthouse. So it's not just that, it's not like we have a whole base. We have a building, and it's a vertical one. Most of it is stairs. So there's not a lot of potential places to hide or have combat, and there's a thing, and it's coming, and it's here, and people are dying, and those to me are all of those great suspense elements that really play into it.
I think I concur. I think you both have made really great examples of it. I think one of the things also that, while maybe not necessary, but does help, is to have a story where the leader of said base or station is either incapacitated or insane or unreasonable or ill-equipped for the situation. And in Doctor Who's case, the Doctor's always having to work with, say, a second in command. So a good example of that would be the Wheel in Space, when the main guy's almost just he's just a little unhinged, and he's also ignoring the idea or ignoring the fact that there's a problem. And I think another one that is the same, that goes along the incapacitated head person would be the 13th Doctor, Syringa Conundrum.
Yeah, Syringa Conundrum.
Syringa Conundrum. That would be another one I think would be a good example. And I think that makes also a good, at least Doctor Who based Under Siege story, is when the Doctor is, where a second in command is sort of put in the leadership role as well.
Excellent points.
So is it good for drama? Does it make for good drama? Does it benefit the story to make a base Under Siege? Sean?
I say yes. I mean, when you look at it, a base Under Siege story at its core is survival. I mean, it kind of boils things down. You can add all kinds of different trappings to it, but at its core, it's we have to last the night. We have to last until help arrives. We have to defeat the bad guys, but we only have this. I mean, there's so many different little things that you could twist and turn your way through the story, that while the structure and the trappings may be very similar, if not outright the same, from segment to segment within the Doctor Who universe, certainly, I think you can still put enough of a spin on it, on how you utilize those trappings. They're tools in the toolbox, as it were. And I know some fans get very, oh man, it's another base Under Siege story. We've already seen this. And I genuinely get giddy with excitement most of the time, because I think it's a good formula. I think it's one that really can drive the drama if it's done well. Now, certainly there are exceptions. There are ones that may miss the mark, as it were, but or ones that we love that are problematically with how they're handled. Warriors of the Deep, looking at you.
Can that be a hindrance, though? I mean, I think Doctor Who, I think I read, has some almost 35 different stories that are considered base Under Siege. Is it a hindrance to a genre or a particular medium like Doctor Who, where fans do react to that? Oh, it's another base Under Siege. Or do you think that? I would argue that in the second Doctor's era, it was probably overused. I think it was overused for a reason. I think it makes for a cheaper, more budgetary shoot. I think it also makes for tightening up your writing as far as character development and things like that. There's not a lot you have to count on when developing the characters surrounding your protagonists. But I think the second Doctor era probably was a little overdone, and I think I would argue that it was overdone in the 10th Doctor era as well, and not so much in the second Doctor era. I think it was overdone in such a way that a lot of the stories started to look the same because the trappings were pretty much the same. Whereas the 10th Doctor era, they were really good about disguising the fact that it was a base Under Siege story until you got most of the way through it and you went, oh, this is a base Under Siege story. So I think the 10th Doctor's era did it better, but in at least disguising that they were doing it. But I think those are two eras that I think it was probably maybe done to the point where fans started going, another, it becomes one of those really grating Doctor Who tropes, and people start to surmise the entire era, the entirety of Doctor Who around this. Oh well, it's a base Under Siege show. What do you think, Keith?
I think you're right that there was a lot in the second Doctor's era, and some of that familiarity and repetitiveness can be a bit off-putting for some people. And some of the best base Under Siege stories are ones where you don't realize it's a base Under Siege story until you stop and think about it after the episode was over.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, yeah, that was totally a base Under Siege story. But to, I think, paint all of Doctor Who with a wide brush, saying, oh, there's a whole lot of base Under Siege. I just crunched the numbers real quick, and according to TARDIS Wikia, there's 33 out of 296.
Right.
That's 11%. I mean, that's not a large amount of Doctor Who. That's actually the reason why it feels that way is because there's such a large clumping in the second Doctor's era.
I think that's true too, but I think also 10% of 100 here doesn't sound like a lot, but when you compare it to the averages of other series, it's probably a lot less for other series. So, and maybe not. I don't know. I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar with Babylon 5 or Stargate or those kind of things. But
yeah.
I know that it's not a. I think there are bottle episodes within other genres, but I don't think we've seen a lot of Base Under Siege with like Star Trek. I mean, as many. We've seen them. Don't get me wrong. They're there, and maybe Sean could speak to this more. But I think the percentage is probably smaller in a lot of other genres.
As with most things, I think it depends on the show. Firefly, what's the name of it? Heart of Gold.
Yeah.
I mean, that is essentially a Base Under Siege story. Now, if we look at Firefly as 13 episodes,
it's almost 10%.
Your percentage is about the same, if not higher.
That's true. That's
so and for a show that has run, I mean, again, that's an exception to the rule, asterisk. But for a show that has been on the air for 50 some odd years, it's kind of amazing that only 10% of them are Base Under Siege in a way. Because certainly with a show of this type, while the universe is your playground, you're going to wind up recycling some ideas.
Yeah.
Solar flares, anyone? But it's just inevitable that it's going to kind of happen, that you're going to get that, I don't want to necessarily say creative rot, but you're going to wind up borrowing or stealing or basing episodes on episodes and things of that nature. And it's funny that the second Doctor era is so, maligned in a way for the sheer number of them. When there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, according to TARDIS Wiki, stories that would count as Base Under Siege stories within the second Doctor's era. But the 10th Doctor's era has 9. And so it's pound for pound right up there,
right?
As far as quantity. Now, again, the styling, the how you tell that story. Oh, you tricked me into not realizing that one does count as a Base Under Siege story. That accounts for a lot of it versus the second Doctor's era. And I'm sure you're right, Glenn. I'm sure it was purely done as a cost-saving measure. Because you lock them into one location, you don't have to worry about a lot of, you don't have to build a lot.
Yeah, right.
And if you paint the corridors a different color, you can reuse that again next week. Lost in Space was famous for that. So there's definitely things. And what I think is kind of interesting is when looking at this list, I'm kind of nodding my head at the selections. They're going, of course. And it's kind of surprising that, maybe they learned their lesson, because after Seeds of Death, which was kind of the last of the second Doctor Base Under Siege story, we don't see one again until, according to this, Ark in Space in the fourth Doctor's era.
Right.
And then Horror Fang Rock, and then Warriors of the Deep in the fifth Doctor. And then we don't get any for the rest of the original classic series run.
Well,
it's not until
to be fair,
End of the
8
World.
didn't get a chance, but
Well,
Yeah.
now I think
It's
you can
not-
also. I think there's also probably if you dipped into Big Finish in this, I think you could probably find Base Under Siege for every incarnation of the Doctor. If
I'm
we
sure.
were to add those in as well.
I think another reason it feels like there's even more even though there is a lot in the second Doctor's era, it feels like there's more than the 10th Doctor's era because the stories were also longer. So it feels like you're dealing with more Base Under Siege because there's more hours of content there.
exactly. It took way longer to deal with said threat than in a 10th Doctor episode. For sure.
And I think that goes back to what I was saying about a lot of the trappings are very, very similar and familiar. I mean, claustrophobic, metallic bases on the moon or in the Arctic, that kind of thing. So in space, I think that's why it's so obvious in the second Doctor's era, where it's maybe a little more subdued or disguised in the 10th Doctor.
And I suppose it's very fair to say too that one man's trash is another man's treasure. The Die Hard template became such a well regarded. Die Hard's a well made movie. Any way you slice it, whether you're a fan or at Christmas or whatever you want to, it's just a well made movie. So well made that it became the archetype for a lot of movies that followed it. And you hear people describe things like Die Hard on a bus.
Right.
And everybody knows what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
Speed. Yep.
Right.
Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard and you just insert segment here. So in a lot of ways, because of that formula, Hollywood's been dipping into it forever. And in a weird way, they're all based under siege stories. They just have different trappings. They've, done them up and doing something different. So now it becomes what people are complaining. Oh, well, that's just Die Hard in a blah, blah, blah. That's Die Hard on a battleship, Die Hard on a submarine, Die Hard. We've had that story. And so you kind of see that same thing. And, could Hollywood defend itself by saying, yeah, but if you look at the total number of films we put out this year.
Yeah.
It's only 10%.
It's only 10% for Die Hard on a... So it can be argued the same way, I think.
Yeah, but I think the problem that you have with that is, I suppose there's some of the same... Doctor Who is guilty of some of the same things, but with Hollywood, a lot of times it's the repeating the formula because it made money the first time, not necessarily because it was a good story, not necessarily because it was, structured in such a way that's easy. A lot of times it's how can we copy this really successful thing and just make, photocopy after photocopy and make cookie cutter movies. And I think that's what I think people get frustrated with, because if it's a good base under siege story, you shouldn't be able to go, oh, that's Die Hard on a. I think Speed is one of those ones that I think is unfairly pointed to, and I think it's because Speed comes so soon after Die Hard. I think that Speed, well, not even, it was a few years after, but Speed I think is unfairly pointed to because it is a innovative and it moved the building, and to me that was smart enough. It put the building in motion, and I think that was enough to set it apart. So I think that's unfair. But you're right, Sean. There are a lot of them that go, this is Die Hard on a, and insert, movie title here or movie location here. Is there a secret? Is there a secret to making a good base under siege story? If you could dig through and find the secret recipe, what are some of the key ingredients that are make it? I don't mean specifically in overviews. I mean, I want to drill down to certain points that make a good base under siege story.
I think one thing that makes a good base under siege story is an inside threat also. Having the threat from the outside, but then having to deal with something on the inside as well. Like in Seeds of Death, or Ark in Space, where you have this alien taking over bodies, and then the aliens trying to get into the space station too. That sort of thing. I think it makes a really good story. Yeah, a collaborator, infiltrator of some sort that's already in there. Oh no, they're out there and in here at the same time. How do we deal with that sort of thing? That makes a good story.
I would agree. That's good. Sean?
I enjoy a ticking clock. Usually with a giant red digital readout. If it's not enough for me to, I mean, it is because I love them. But okay, bad guy trying to get in. Okay, that's a thing. Now let's add in. Oh, but if bad guy gets in before this, then this happens. Oh, okay. So now we're on a schedule. We've got to hit, or. You get locked into that kind of thing. Oh, the base is going to blow up. The self-destruct has been pressed, or we have to last until help arrives at this time. Okay, now I'm watching the clock with you, and I think that's an easy way to kind of dribble a little more tension into things.
I would agree, and I'm going to cheat just a little bit because I think the secret to a good base under siege story, and we talked a little bit about the long form of Doctor Who in the early days. I think having cliffhangers very much serves a base under siege story well. It's something that it's not as easily done in a movie. I think it can be done in a movie, but in a series like the classic series of Doctor Who, where you would have at least 3 different cliffhangers in a 4-part series or more in longer form series. I think a good cliffhanger in a base under siege makes it that it adds to that tension, it adds to that suspense, and it adds to that impending peril and doom for our heroes.
I also like remote locations. You can do it. Web of Fear, I think, is probably a very famous example. I mean, we're in London. We're in the heart of London in the underground, but we've cut it off. The web has effectively created this isolated area, and that's kind of a cool way of doing it.
The isolation is key, otherwise you can't take it seriously.
Yeah, Horror Fang Rock with the lighthouse, or Warriors of the Deep with being so many fathoms underground or underwater, or the moon.
Well,
certainly the moon base would count.
I think the more isolated and out of touch with the rest of the outside world, I think the better. Yeah.
Well, and it goes to when you look at Seeds of Doom, which we've all talked about how much we love that one. And the way it opens with the first 2 episodes being this very thing from another world feel. I mean, you're in the Antarctica. You can't. It's not like hopping in the car and driving away from the problem. You're kind of stuck there. And so that's part of the brilliant move of getting the Doctor and Sarah Jane down there. You're going to take a plane. We're not going to let you use the TARDIS. You're going to have to deal with mundane methods.
Right.
But then to suddenly switch and go over to this 4-part, or the other 4 parts being in the house, which I guess in a way is also base under siege, but it's certainly a different feel to it.
Right.
It suddenly becomes a lot less if you can pick up the phone and call for help. Right. But when you pick up the phone and say, the line's gone dead. Oh, now we're in trouble. I mean, it just... that isolation is key.
Yeah. Is there a difference between Base Under Siege and Ghost of the Machine? Keith?
Can you define Ghost in the Machine?
Oh, Ghost of the Machine is usually a threat from interior, something within a unit, and it could be within an isolated station or something like that. Sean, help me out here. Help me describe Ghost of the Machine.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think you have to have an external force trying to get in to make it a true base under siege. Like this list I'm looking at has the Tomb of the Cybermen as a base under siege, and I don't necessarily view that as a base under siege. Yes, there's a group of people in a small, isolated, confined area, but there's no aliens trying to get in. It's mostly the Cybermen trying to get out.
So it does.
The aliens trying to get out.
That fits the Ghost in the Machine, I think, scenario.
It's almost a reverse base under siege,
right?
Because you're trying to keep them in, whereas opposed to instead of trying to keep them out. So I think there can be elements of base under siege to a Ghost in the Machine, but I think it really has to have that external force of them trying to get to somebody on the inside.
Yeah. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose something like I've forgotten the name of it. What's the third Doctor story? That's just the 2-parter.
Oh, third Doctor story?
First Doctor.
First Doctor. Oh, that's
Unearthly Child Daleks.
Yeah, Edge of Destruction.
Edge of Destruction. In a way, Edge of Destruction is a very Ghost in the Machine kind of, because it's the different elements that are happening that's driving everybody nuts.
Yeah.
And it's because of the, whatever ghost has actually infiltrated the TARDIS. It's a mechanical problem. It's also a bottle show.
Right.
But it's not a base under siege because they're only at siege within their own minds.
Right.
There is no external something or another.
So,
but I suppose you can make the argument that, I just lost it. There's another one that's kind of a similar setup, but there's not really an outside force, but it's already in there with them.
Well, what about Dalek? What about Dalek, where it's not an invading force, it's not something coming from the outside, it's something that awakens within. Is that more Ghost in the Machine, or is that more Base Under Siege?
I think that's more Ghost in the Machine
because of the internal threat.
Same. It's kind of this Dalek version of Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it'd be similar to the original Alien, where it's already on the ship, and we're just, we're either hunting it down, and it becomes a bug hunt, or it's a you know, 10 Lillians is knocking us off. But I suppose under that logic, you could also say Horror Fang Rock could fall under that because, well, for a good chunk of it, the shapeshifter's in there with them.
Yeah, but it's still it's still an external threat that becomes an internal threat. But you could argue that with Dalek as well. But
yeah.
So I guess
still an external threat if they invite it in.
I guess based on those descriptions, I think some Ghosts in the Machines can be Base Under Siege. Some Base Under Siege can be some Ghost Machines, as in the same way that I think some Base Under Siege could be considered bottled episodes, but not every bottled episode is a Base Under Siege. So
yeah. Do we think it's a bad thing? I mean, at its core, I mean, I've argued definitely for that it's a good dramatic element. But is it bad? Does Doctor Who rely on it too much?
I think it can be a tired trope, especially if it's used continually in rapid succession near each other. I think that is one of the things that the Second Doctor era suffers from, is we have a lot of back-to-back, or not even back-to-back, but very close to stories that are very Base Under Siege. And I also think, where I was arguing for it earlier, that a lot of times you don't have to focus on character development. It also can be a lazy way for an author or a writer to write a story so that they're kind of hitting all of the key points and then maybe not thinking outside the box. If they can hit all the key points and introduce other elements that you maybe didn't think of, or different, bring in another idea, or turn a Base Under Siege on its head, then all credit to them. But I think it can be very limiting for a writer, and can be almost a crutch at times.
I would agree with pretty much everything Glenn said.
I can see that. I can agree with that. There are elements to them that I enjoy so much that I don't care that they're a crutch, especially if they're done well. It's so easy for me to fanboy hand wave it and just go, yeah, don't care. I mean, in my mind, if I were to pen the perfect episode, it would be a Base Under Siege story. And not only that, the title would come up in that Thing from Another World font. And the title of the episode would be Base Under Siege. I would just run with it, Just
really lean into it.
How many tropes can we shove into this thing and still make it work before it breaks under the weight of them? But again, I'm a simple guy with simple pleasures. So
well, and if I look at the list, there's a number of them on here are some of my favorite stories: Tomb of the Cybermen, Web of Fear, Seeds of Death, Ark in Space, Into the World, Dalek. I mean, if I go down this list, there are a lot of them that are considered Base Under Siege that would be in my near the top of my list of favorites. So I think deep down I like a Base Under Siege story, even though I think sometimes when I recognize it, I cringe a little bit. But obviously, it's able to tell a good story and still be a Base Under Siege. So I think I like them too.
They're just fun.
Well, in summary, do you guys have anything to say about Base Under Siege that that we did kind of touch on?
What's your favorite?
The
Base Under Siege.
I knew you were going to.
How can I not like a story trope when it's so heavily used with Cybermen stories? Cybermen seem to be the most used villain for a Base Under Siege, especially in the Second Doctor's era. So how could I not like a Base Under Siege if I like Cybermen?
For me, it's either Horror Fang Rock or Dalek. They're pretty close. What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I'd probably say Fang Rock. That one ticks a lot of boxes for me. Fourth Doctor being one of them, so that's kind of an added bonus there. But I think, I mean, some of the examples that they're giving here of the new series ones, Waters of Mars.
Yeah, that's a great
that's
one
a
too.
that's a great one, and it's tough to not. Okay, now that I've said it, yeah, maybe,
Midnight's another good one.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that's one that I don't necessarily think that you would right off the bat go to and say, oh, it's a base under siege story.
Well, to me,
because it's
that's more
so
Ghost of the
differently
Machine.
telling.
That's more Ghost
Yeah,
of the
okay.
Machine in a way.
Yeah.
Although, again, it starts off very much, we've got to keep it out.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
It's already with us.
It is
so.
an invading force, you're right.
Mummy on the Orient Express.
It's an all right one.
Yeah, but we've established you just don't have any taste. So that's...
All right, well, Sean, what do we got coming up on the schedule? This was a good topic, by the way. Nice job.
Thank you. Coming up next on the schedule, we continue with our Mucho Master discussion, celebrating 50 years of the Master. We have from way back when, the Doctor Who Annual 1974, which came out the year after I was born. I won't put two and two together on that because I'll come up with a big number. There are 2 short stories, Listen, the Stars, and Out of the Green Mist. And then there's a comic, The Time Thief. And those all come from that volume, which we will be discussing as part of our year-long celebration of the Master. And it's about time for a new update for the schedule to appear, I realize. So look for that soon.
We're getting there close. Well, you can look for that on Traveling the Vortex, our website, travelingthevortex.com. And if you get any value out of this podcast, why not consider putting some value back into it? You can do that by clicking on that patron link on our webpage and consider supporting us. And thank you to those who already do. Consider giving us a 5-star review wherever you subscribe to this podcast, and make sure you join in the conversations on our listeners forum on Facebook. And if you're not already following us on Facebook, be sure to look for us there. We're also on Twitter. We're at Travel Vortex. You can find us those places as well, and contact us and let us know. Anything else we need to do before we close this one out, fellas? All right. If not, until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.